My guest today is someone who's challenged textbook economics to come up with some really new, innovative economic ideas. He's showed remarkable refrain from public dissent, but has held his own. On a personal note, I've greatly been enriched through the multiple interactions that I've had with him. And I think I can safely say that India is going to miss his independent economic thinking. As Arvind Subramanian gets ready to demit office as India's Chief Economic Advisor, it's a pleasure to have him back in his present capacity for one last time right here on ET Now. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for the kind words.
3 years, 9 months. As you get ready to demit office, is this mission accomplished or does a lot more need to be done?
I think that, as I've said before, it's been a 24/7 high. It's been a fabulous experience, the most enriching, rewarding job I've ever done and probably will ever do. Lots of gratifying sense of, having been done and contributed to things having done. But, no one can ever say, everything is done. There's, India is really a challenging country, so the challenges will always be there. So you can't really say that, mission accomplished or whatever, right? The last time someone said mission accomplished, he really regretted what he said on the aircraft carrier. I don't know whether
yes.
whether all of you remember that. So
all right,
I
so
think
that's
one should never say mission accomplished.
And I think your boss and somebody you call Minister Arun Jaitley always says there's never a finishing line to reforms. Yeah. But the constant criticism that comes against economists like yourselves is, and I'm going to mouth something that I personally don't believe in, but a lot of other people have hurled this accusation at you and many others, is that you come to India to embellish your CVs and you go back better armed with an India experience, perhaps to a better placed, higher profile job. How are you going to respond to that?
See, I think that the 2-3 things I want to say. First, I don't think and I honestly mean this, I don't think there can be a better job than what I've done. I just think it's all downhill from here. So, I don't know what I need to embellish my CV for. Maybe I need to de-embellish my CV so that when the next someone comes and says, is this your CV? You're too qualified for this job, having been Chief Economic Advisor. So I think I completely see. But on the other question of coming and going, I don't know what kind of what underlies this. See, India needs as much talent and expertise as it can get, competence. I think we should get this from whatever quarters we get. And finally, I think we should judge people or want people or assess people based on what they do, not where they come from or where they're going. That's point number 2. I think point number 3 is that, you see, I think we're now in a world where there are no permanent, comings and goings. We're all circulating all over. So, and I think Minister Jaitley has also said that, my heart will always be here. I will always be working on India. I will always be available to whoever, asks for advice. I will also probably offer advice if I'm not asked for advice. And certainly my open, I've told all my colleagues, the ministers, the Prime Minister's office, that if I get a question from them or some advice on email or a phone, I will respond within 20 to 25 minutes. That's a promise. That's why I think. But I think that therefore, I really do think we should get away from this, foreign born. It almost smacks.
Fair point.
I think that we should be, open to talent wherever it comes from.
I'm going to take the point that you made a little earlier, that you will perhaps give advice even when not asked for it sometimes. Was it easy being an outspoken economist in the establishment? Because the perception is that outspoken economists and outspoken men are not really welcome here. From your friend Raghuram Rajan to your namesake Arvind Panagriya, they've all gone back, and that raises the big question, can this government retain independent economists at large?
You see, I think firstly, a big warning. I think, they say, 1 is an anecdote and 2 is a theory or whatever. I think that, stringing these 3 names together is actually not quite right at all, because the circumstances of each of these is very different. In my case, the government and I, we've had I think as Minister Jaitley himself said, we've had a very, wonderful relationship with ministry, PMO, and so on. So, so there's no sense that either they could not retain me or I didn't want to stay. It's been a very, very cooperative, productive relationship. But I think the point that you raised, within government, I have never not been told not to express my views freely.
But was this freedom to express your views freely restricted internally to a gentleman like Jaitley? Or did you actually see resistance because the ideologue like the RSS or the Swadeshi Jagran Manch haven't been very welcoming?
No. I think there's a difference between being allowed or given the space to speak internally and whether they listen or not listen. These are two different things. Not once have I been told you cannot say what you want internally. Of course, I took it to maybe extraordinary lengths with the finance minister, with Mr. Jaitley, but I was allowed to speak completely my mind, internally always.
You said that the government should be open to talent from anywhere across the globe because that is where the world is. It's becoming superfluous. Everybody is moving from one destination to the other.
No, and also, but also remember that this also stems from the view that, see, let me, at the risk of digressing, just to make it, see, I think my understanding of economic development around the world, which I've studied to some extent, is that countries with strong, effective states and state capacity are the countries that do well. So building state capacity means having talent in the public sector.
Absolutely.
Expertise, skill. And, and India needs it. It's not that we have, all the talent and that we can choose from. We need all the competence we can.
But even as you say that, do we run the risk, given this whole hyper-nationalist narrative, do we run the risk that your successor will perhaps be chosen from within the Indian shores? Is being desi suddenly the calling card for being the economist in a government?
See, I would be very disappointed because that would be like saying Arvind Subramanian did the Videshi, the mentally un-Indian Arvind Subramanian did a very bad job, and that's why we need. See, I think that we should choose whoever the successor is should be based entirely on competence, merit, and technical expertise. And I think that, if you look at chief economic advisors, I mean, it's been a very illustrious list of people we've had. Yeah. Yes. And I think government, everyone, public wants and will maintain this kind of,
So you don't believe being desi is a calling card to be an economist?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
But I will ask you a quick question before I really move to pure economics. And one of the questions is that the ad that has been put out to find your replacement, many people, has sparked a debate because many people believe it dilutes the criteria. It talks about somebody with just a master's degree, being a doctorate is desirable, having researched reports desirable. Isn't that diluting the position? I mean, I'm not trying to make you feel good about this. You've held this position. Raghuram Rajan has held this position. Bimal Jalan, IG Patel. I mean, look at the kind of illustrious men who held this position. And now you just want a simple person with a master's degree in economics to come and advise the government?
See, firstly, factually, I don't know whether that has changed really. I think the formal advertisement that was put out, I think that was also, the job description in the past. I don't think, I may be wrong on this, but I don't think so. I don't think it's really changed. So that's one. Second, I think that, these are all hopefully minimum criteria. These are not, when the actual selection happens, I think government will be very conscious of what you've just said, that this is a job, it's a very important job, it's a very meaningful job, and it's been held in the past by very illustrious people. You mentioned some names. I could mention many more names. If you look at the board.
Feel free to add yourself to that list.
No,
I'm going to say this on national television. But I'll take one more seemingly uncomfortable question before I talk economics, and that question is, when you take a role like this, which is a public role, you are prepared for challenges.
Exactly.
But were you prepared for the seeming challenge that came from this very personal onslaught from certain quarters? Subramanian Swamy to be one of them. They didn't question your competence, they were questioning your country of residence and hence insinuations on your loyalty.
Yeah, I think that, you see, one, if you're in the public eye, I mean, I think you just have to be, take for granted that there will be all kinds of, whatever, praise, criticisms, fair criticisms, unfair criticism. I think you just have to be prepared for that.
Let's talk about the other debate that you've sparked.
But I think that, just one last point, that I give a lot of credit to the government and Minister Jaitley, that whenever these, at least when these attacks were hurled at me, I mean,
they jumped to your
yeah, absolutely. And so I felt completely protected from these attacks.
Fair point. Dr. Subramanian, you have been on record to say, and I think you've sparked another fresh debate by the use of the term stigmatized capitalism.
Exactly, true.
And you believe this is a big challenge for the Indian economy. Two quick questions there. A, what and who do you blame for the stigmatized capitalism? And do you believe this has been one of the biggest hindrances in private sector investment taking off despite many efforts being made? And also, is this also a big roadblock in privatization of banks or airlines and things like that?
Yeah. So I think, I do think that this idea of stigmatized capitalism, which I've kind of come to over the last 1 or 2 years, slowly I've kind of I think it's actually a first order, understanding that I've had of the Indian economy. One, I think it goes back probably to the very origins of the mixed economy that we had. So it goes back 20, 25 years, because I say we started with crony socialism, even the private sector that did well, we always weren't sure whether they did well because they were genuinely competitive or because they could, manipulate government policy. Then we had all these scandals and we had all of that. So I think we've reached a situation where, the public doesn't fully embrace the private sector. That's one part of stigmatized capitalism. But also the public has questions about the ability of government to regulate private capital. You see, so there are both these things going on. So I think it's very long standing, 20, 25, 30 years. That's why it's a very deep problem. Now, 2 or 3 things that you said, what I think it implies, there are 2, 3 big implications. I don't think it will come in the way of private sector investment, in new private sector investment, new sectors, and so on. So we allow new airlines to come in, new telecom companies to come in, new startups to come in. That won't be the problem. Where it will be, I think it is posing a problem, is when the ability of the private sector to take on existing public sector assets. That I think is going to be...
Because that's going to be under constant...
Exactly, scrutiny, exactly, right?
Sure.
One, and therefore, and then there's the whole 4C problem, the investigative agencies go after you. So public sector decision making, that's what, but no, one last and then...
Sure.
But the second, I think, consequence of this, which is kind of partly the way out, is what that means is that more and more we will willy-nilly have the judiciary taking over many of these decisions, as we've seen, because it seems to be an organ, for all its faults, still commands public legitimacy in terms of making these delicate decisions about the private sector.
And that is perhaps why we will see IBC as a go-to.
Exactly.
And I'll come to that in just a bit. But I have a more big picture question to ask of you. You came in the tenure of this government, and you came at a time when the economy was seemingly recovering from the policy paralysis of UPA 2 for very different reasons, political reasons there. But do you believe this government has been held hostage to perception management? For some of the reasons that you said, because there is greater public scrutiny of is the private sector being given a backdoor entry? I don't want to get into the politics of it. The perception that is this government closer to the industry at large? Has policy making or decision making been held hostage to perception management in the present government?
See, I think stigmatized capitalism, is...
And that could have fueled it.
Yeah, I think stigmatized capitalism is the origin of that. I think it influences, decision making. For example, I was in favor of a bad bank, as you know. But I think that underestimated the problem of stigmatized capitalism, right? That's why the IBC seems to be a more workable framework. I think, decisions to privatize, I think both, banking, outside banking, have been, I think, held back because of this stigmatized capitalism and the kind of decision making, not paralysis, but but the difficulty of decision making. Even honest, good decisions are now increasingly difficult to make. And I don't think it's because of this government. I think this is just a feature of the landscape for the last many years, and I think it will continue for some more years as well, unless somehow we just break out of this.
And what will help us break out of this? Because what we are seeing as a consequence of this is, and like you rightly mentioned, we're seeing the judiciary step in to what should be commercial decisions. These decisions should be taken by banks on how much haircut one should take, how do you resolve the NPMS, but you're actually seeing the judiciary step in. IBC and NCLT is nothing but that. How are we then going to break out of this conundrum, so to say?
See, I think, again, to give you a very big picture answer to this, is that, see, I feel that the more the public gains trust in government and the state, and it could be if the government, say, delivers, power better, Ujjwala better, housing better.
So it has to be a function of governance.
Yeah, I think exactly. It has to be, the more the executive gains the trust by showing it can do things and do things well, efficient delivery of public services, I think can go a long way towards rebuilding this trust in government. And, remember, trust is something you can lose very easily, you acquire it very slowly. So I think, if the government can continue, so good governance across the board is one way I think we gain the trust. So that the trust that you gain, say, delivering better services, then you can say, then you can trust this government also to make decisions about private sector, public sector assets and so on.
Like you said, you were initially in favor of a bad bang, but obviously because of stigmatized capital that was never going to take off, and then we veered towards the IBC that was seemingly taking foot, and suddenly you have this Sashak. Do these new measures add to confusion? What will be our go-to norms for NPA resolution? Because many people have questioned how are the AMCs going to be funded and all of that. There are no silver bullets, I understand, and you need a whole barrage of things. But does this also add to confusion?
See, I think the IBC, for all the reasons that I've said, is still the main game in town. Sure. I think that's going to be the basis, the legal basis for resolving many things. I certainly think that, look, it's a game-changing reform. We've seen progress. Two companies, they've been resolved. I think one more is going to be resolved. But it's still taking more time than we want it to take. So I think our focus on an ongoing basis has to be, how do we make this IBC process even more effective? Should we do it? What kind of complementary actions should we take? I mean, those can involve strengthening the NCLT process. Those can also involve taking some of the burden off the NCLT process. I think that's something that we need to give more thought to. And this the recent set of initiatives, I haven't studied it enough, but I think it has raised the kind of questions that you're asking. I think these will get addressed, over the course of the next few months.
Were we late in dealing with this problem? Could we have dealt with the NPA a lot earlier? And if I may just add another question to this, as a result of this crackdown, the collateral damage that many believe could be a credit freeze. There are these overzealous punitive measures that are being put in place, bankers are being jailed. Who's going to lend them?
See, just to set the record straight, sure. I think that I do think there's a very, very important and interesting question in terms of, looking back, did we act on time? And I meant by we, both the government and the RBI. Did we not? If so, why or why not? I think it's a really first order question to answer honestly and candidly. I think the government and the RBI should sit together and think about this carefully. Not to kind of spread blame, assign blame or give credit, but to see in terms of how to go forward, because now I think all of us have to together address this as a nation together, because it's a really intractable, difficult problem. We need to make much faster progress on this. I think that, and remember, I think both the government and the RBI need to think about whether it took too long or not. I think that, just to clarify what I said, I think that in terms of my 4 R's, recognition, resolution, recapitalization, and reform, I think on recognition we've made a lot of progress, and I think the asset quality review that was started in 2015, I think helped that process along. Yes. That's what I meant when I said that, yeah.
Let me, because you mentioned the RBI and you've had some sort of a tumultuous relationship over the last 3.5 years with them, can the government and the RBI ever get along? Because the mandates are so different. One has to manage price, one has to boost growth. And the other part of this argument is that while you were one of the big proponents of a rate reduction at the time at which the debate they did not do you in hindsight believe they did the right thing? Look at how inflation has accelerated and the world around us is far more troubled than it was.
I thank you for asking this question, because I've seen this, I've read about this. Let me be very clear. I think there was about probably about a 12 to 18, 20 month period when interest rates were too high. Okay, I think the inflation forecasts were always on the high side, they were one-sided. I think for that period we should have had lower rates. You can't say, oh, for 2 years, after 2 years, because things have changed, therefore those 2 years we shouldn't have had, we should be preparing always for the rainy day or whatever. We should have had lower rates then. But I think thereafter, when the external environment changed, where inflation went up, I would completely support monetary actions that respond to those changing conditions. So I think we should have had lower rates for some time in the past. And I think how the RBI has responded recently to the recent bout, both interest rate actions, exchange rate actions, reserve actions, I think they've done a commendably responsible job, because the circumstances have changed. So on this, I've not been inconsistent at all.
All right. Let's talk about fiscal space, because you're also one of the big proponents of denouncing fiscal hawks, and you've been on record to say that fiscal hawks cost investment in infrastructure. They kind of reined in the government on that count. But as you prepare to leave, and many people believe there are very large risks that are posed before India's fiscal situation, are you wary of them?
See, again, I think there's a kind of analog with the monetary policy debate, right? Remember that we had this, raging debate at the time of the 2015-16 budget, right? Essentially, the debate was, should we have very fast aggressive consolidation, or should we have more relaxed consolidation? And remember, at that time, I was in favor of more gradual consolidation for 2 or 3 very important reasons. One, inflation was low. 2, growth was not very high. 3, private investment, the twin balance sheet, we're all in the thick of that, right? So I think in that period was when I think we should have, had perhaps more gradual and had more public investment. But again, now circumstances have changed. The macroeconomy has changed. Growth is seeming to be picking up. The output gap, how much slack in the capacity has come down. The external environment is much more unsettled. So, in this situation, I would completely support what the government is doing in terms of consolidation, fiscal prudence, etc. So it has to be contingent on the data and the circumstances. So I think on both of these, I think I've not changed my mind. I think the policy has had to change in line with changing circumstances, and I think I was right
then, and you're right now.
And then and now.
Okay, I can't not ask you a question on GST, because you've played a very important part in its implementation, and this is a historic reform, whatever the detractors say. But forget the botchy implementation, forget about the rushed implementation and execution. The industry and the traders for the last 10 years were asking for a GST as if this was going to be a magic wand. But they have still not embraced the GST. Does the answer lie that it is complex and complicated, or are you going to be candid to admit that we are a nation that doesn't like to pay taxes and GST has cast the net wider, and is that why it's not being embraced as well?
I don't know how. No. I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to be honest. Sure. I'm trying to understand what your evidence is for saying that GST has not really been embraced by the private sector. I don't know. Maybe you're right. I just don't know what kind of evidence would need to be brought into this. I mean, I do think that look, I both think that GST is a game changer. I think the first year, yes, there were challenges, but I think the system responded to the challenges. I think the revenue performance at the end of the first year has been tremendous. I think one of the understated facts which we reported in the economic survey is that the amount of voluntary registration that has taken place has also been very significant and has surprised us all, right? Now, I think that part of the reason perhaps where industry has not been as whatever, one could be the fact that, for example, exporter refunds, the whole input tax credit mechanism is not maybe as functioning as smoothly as it should. I think that will happen. Second, I think maybe the system is still a bit too complex, both in terms of the rate structure and I think again the GST Council is kind of responding to that. So I think that
what is the scope of rate rationalization? Because I know you disagreed with these multiple slabs earlier, but do you go back convinced that in India a 1 or a 2 rate slab is going to be utopian and will perhaps never be a reality?
No, but I think here again I'm glad you asked this question, because I think that in some ways the debate should not be 1 or 2. I don't think India we can ever have that. But I think we should have the debate of why not only 3? Because remember, at the moment, we have many more than 3. So, yeah, whatever, you count, I don't know what the count is. But I think that should be the debate, not this, 1 or not 1. Because 1, I fully understand and sympathize that when you don't have instruments to cushion people against the regressivity of this, you're going to look for this to cater to some of those objectives as well. Yes. But I think in some ways I'm a bit disappointed that the debate is not around why not just 3.
Fair point. And I think, you hit the nail on its head. It can't be 1, but why should it be 5 and why can't it not be 3? I'm going to seek your indulgence in a little bit of a speculative question, because many have thought that you could have been the top contender of the RBI governor's position. Do you think you were considered too foreign to be given a shot at the top job?
I don't know whether I was considered, whether I was too foreign for the job, or maybe just too incompetent for the job. That could also be a possibility. Okay,
one last question. Given the fact that you've said this has been the most exciting phase of your professional career, how ready are you to babysit next? And is a book on your years as CA in the works? Because I can tell you by experience, they happen to be international bestsellers.
See, on the first thing, I've said that we are going back for personal reasons, and that's going to be a new chapter in our lives. We're looking forward to that very much. But I also feel, because this is the best job I've ever done, I seriously worry that I might be in a permanent state of depression professionally after this job. So for those of who say, I'm embellishing my CV, they should probably give me, a medication or therapeutic drugs after that. So I think it's going to be, it's going to be a new chapter. In terms of books, I've always wanted to write a book on economic development, but this experience has been so rich, so rewarding, and it has given me lots of ideas. So I think that it's almost as if I don't write 1 or 2 books on India going forward, I have not done a good enough job, I've not learnt enough, I've not contributed enough.
I've had a great experience interacting with you over all these years. Your candor is refreshing, and I wish you all the very best with babysitting to begin with. Thanks very much,
a lot, Supriya. Thank you.